Zero.
Well, awesome. Looks like folks are jumping on. We'll probably give everyone a couple more minutes since it's just the mid-afternoon in New York time and exactly noon for me in California. So we're just going to give folks maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. See 12 people. And just some housekeeping items for attendees. Thank you for joining us. Definitely a great pleasure. And it's a relatively informal fireside chat today. So if you have any question, we're gonna leave about 10 to 15 minutes toward the end for you to ask. And you can also, of course, type in your questions anytime during the chat, and we will go with the flow. All right. Okay. See more people hopping on. I think we can perhaps go ahead and start. Is it okay if we start now and Faye? Okay, wonderful, great. Well, first off, thanks everyone for jumping in. It's really a great pleasure to see so many faces, and of course, 2 of my dear and near friends, Faye and I, from Munich. So my name is Daisy Du. I'm a Yale School of Management class 2012 alum, and I'm also a member of the organizing committee for Yale Career Panel, a candid view from different professions. Before we start, I wanted to say a few words about the Yale Career Panel. The career panels were created about, I think, 12 years ago to really give the Yale students and alum a candid view of a variety of different professions where there could be myths and misconceptions about each industry, its outlook, and the types of people who do well and are happy, and how you succeed in the profession. And today, we're gonna have a really, in my view, a very unique and highly exciting topic that is not necessarily about just one type of profession or career, but about global career in general. And before I start, I wanted to say that in the panel, you can probably see 4 of us. I'm the moderator for today, and we also have Faye and I, and Peter is our organizer, but he's gonna just be a technical host and behind the scenes. So any question, feel free to type in the chat box or save them in the last 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll make sure to get to them as much as we can. Going back to the topic, I know many of us that are affiliated with Yale are probably either doing already or seriously considering some type of global career. Myself, for example, I was born and raised in Beijing and came to the US about, almost 20 years ago for school and then stay here. I've always had a global career, working in global enterprises, serving global markets, and working directly with global colleagues as well as customers. That said, I think our panelists today, which I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit later, have really unique perceptive and also experience about navigating global career. Faye and I, they actually are my good friends and also from class 2012 School of Management. So kudos to SOM. We have all 3 of us from SOM today. And they met each other at SOM, got married after SOM, and now live in Munich, I believe. Also have 2 beautiful young kids. Without further ado, I know you can probably see their short bio, but their experience are far more exciting, I can guarantee, than what you have already seen. But anyway, so why don't I turn to Faye and Nye, and you guys can decide whoever wanted to start first to give us a little bit overview of yourself and your career.
So I can start, yeah. So a little bit about myself. I am American. I was born in Taiwan, but I grew up in the States, and I worked and lived on the East Coast of the U.S., on the West Coast of the U.S., but I grew up actually in Middle America, in Oklahoma. And so I've worked kind of both coasts, and then later on in Europe, first in the UK, and then most recently in Germany and in Berlin. And that's what I'll talk a lot more about today. I have 2 kids with my wife Faye here, and yeah, happy to share.
Thank you. Faye?
I was born and raised in China. My hometown is Nanjing, a big metropolitan that's quite close to Shanghai. I started my first job out of college in Hong Kong, doing investment banking, a lot of cross-border transactions. And then later I came to Yale to pursue my MBA, and then stayed in the States to work afterwards. Met Nye and kind of thought we settled in the States. However, a few years later, we moved across the pond to have a life in London, and now we live in Berlin. I started my career in more traditional capital markets, financial services, and now I am in fintech, so more in a tech industry, but fintech. Yeah, happy to share more as we go through the chat. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, I have to say, Faye, I love your background. Before we start, I know 5 minutes ago, roughly, everybody was chatting, what's your background? And looks like the Yale old campus. Why don't you, start off, tell us a little bit about the background, where it is.
So the background is a picture from our living room, looking over the Hampstead neighborhood in northern London, where we happily spent 4 years there. Yeah, it was a happy memory, so I kept that picture.
Wonderful. And clearly, Nye, looks like you guys don't live in the same household. That's a very different view, though.
You know what I wanted to do was be on theme and actually use the background of our current apartment, but I didn't get a chance to do that in time.
I get that. I know it's relatively late for you in Munich or Berlin, wherever you are. We have a lot of questions today. So I know that I can already see some raising hands and questions from the audience, but maybe first off, why don't you tell us, how did you start your global profession? Maybe start from right after college, or right after, whenever you consider the starting point of your global career. How did you start?
Yeah, I think for me, I was born in Taiwan, and I moved to the States, and I grew up in the States. So I'd always felt more international, even though I'm American. And after college, I spent a little bit of time actually working for a nonprofit based in Taiwan on education reform, before I then joined Google, and I worked in big tech for a while, and then I went to grad school where I met Faye. And coming out of grad school, I spent some time in New York City working in consulting at McKinsey, before going to LA and San Francisco working in the games industry. And that's where an opportunity came up when the company I was working on at the time, I was the general manager of one of the studios for this company called Zynga, which is a big company in the mobile games industry back then. They had acquired a different company in the UK called Natural Motion. And one of the things that the CEO of Zynga at the time asked a number of us to consider is to move to London to help this company, Natural Motion, both build up its product management function as well as lead one of the 3 studios that was there. And so I discussed it with Faye. So it was more career-based, career-driven. I discussed it with Faye at the time, And it was something that was sounds a little bit ridiculous at the time because the context was we had just bought a house in the Bay Area and we just had our first kid, our son. He was a little bit, I think he was 6 months old, 6 or 7 months old at the time. So at first I was thinking, well, this doesn't really make sense. But I think when we talked, one of the things you heard Faye say was she started off her career in Hong Kong in financial services. And I think she had a chance to work in either in, I forget if it was in the UK versus somewhere in Europe, and she didn't take it back then. And so there's always this thought of, hey, maybe we should try living in Europe and see what it's like. And so we discussed it and decided, hey, if we don't do this now, at the time, I think we were 30, 31, 32. If we don't do this now, we have a kid, we have our house, we're probably never going to do it ever again. So might as well take this chance to do it. So that's how I started off sort of going abroad and working abroad. It's sparked by an opportunity at the company I was at, but then also personal interest from my wife and I. And then since then, one opportunity led to another, and I've just stayed in Europe the last 8 years. Faye, do you want to share yours?
Yeah. So, well, so I am an international student back then. And then, so I did start my career naturally outside the States, in Hong Kong. I mean, but nowadays financial services are quite global. The capital markets are quite well connected overall. And so yeah, after my 4-year stint in cross-border M&A, it was quite a common thing for people in my industry to pursue their MBA and then explore what could happen next. So I had an open mind when I came to Yale, and I got curious, and also I still like financial services quite a lot. And then Yale being closer to New York, where the breadth and depth of capital markets, it's quite amazing. So I just naturally try to explore opportunities, and then started in New York, and then we met Nai, and then as he mentioned, the moving to London is the trigger.
I have to interject here. I moved to New York City because Faye found a job there. So
yes, and
Maybe
then
yeah.
yeah, it feels like so there's another thing is like once you are no longer a single person, relocation, it's no longer it's slightly more complicated. It's about planning a life of two people back then together. So there's compromises needs to be made. There are practical planning needs to be done, and then there's mutual understanding needs to be established, I guess. And then as Nai mentioned, London was triggered by his career opportunity, but I always was curious about exploring that, and also London being another major financial hub, which is a natural fit for where my career is going. And then I guess once you started to move once or twice, it becomes easier afterwards because you've done it. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point, though, Faye, because I even though I couldn't really see and tell the average age of our audience today, but I know that based on the historical information, or audience who are usually interested in this type of career panel or fire chat are younger, on the younger side, maybe 20 or early 30s. Either are single or just started a family, maybe just had their first kid, or were thinking about having kids, and having this type of, in my view, rather major career move is quite impactful. It's impactful to you from a professional perspective, it's impact to your spouse, it's also impactful to your kids. From that perspective, and this question actually, and of course I welcome answers from both of you, but I'm particularly interested in Faye's viewpoint as a start, as a couple as a mom at that time of 6 months old, how did you prepare professionally because you have a really good job, and how did you prepare for the move? And how did you prepare for the child as well as the family?
Yeah, so when I had the job opportunity and we had the chat about London, I mean, despite that, me thinking, oh, it's cool and nice experience to live in Europe, the practicality comes in. We have a baby, and then moving with the child is no easy, and then you also have to sort out his the nursery, the education system, and how do you practically finding a new apartment with a person who's so important to your life who can't even walk, like you basically have to hold him 24/7. It is very, very challenging. But as Nai and I discussed, we felt at least it's better to move with a baby than moving with a teenager, I guess. So so I think maybe we should just catch the opportunity and take the challenge and then see what it takes us. So we kind of like trying to embrace the challenge and then make the move, but obviously practically so the compromise that we did is Nai will move and then kind of have a seamless transition from his previous role to the new role because it's an internal company relocation. And I will take a short break to help the family settle down while explore my next career opportunity. And then we also didn't take the decision lightly. We actually took 2-3 weeks to toss around before Nai got back to his company to say yes or no. And then during that 2-3 weeks, I sent out some, like I was browsing the internet, check LinkedIn, and then connected with my previous 2 coworkers who have worked in London before just to have a general chat and then to see what's out there. And then I also reach out to some recruiters, some previous recruiters that they have international offices. I have like a casual chat with recruiters to understand the salary expectation, what are the roles that's available. So I did my research very seriously. I even, sent 3 resumes to 3 companies. I actually got a casual first job interview with a global organization, with 2 global organizations. So I was like, wow, this sounds promising. It doesn't sound as difficult as I thought. Like I'm still based in the Bay Area, and then there are already companies are willing to entertain this long distance interview. And so we did some research, and then so based on that, we made a decision.
I like that. It was certainly a very thoughtful process, even though it was short. I have to say, seems short from our perspective, but I appreciate you sharing the details. Anything you want to add, Nai, from that perspective?
I think one of the things that I also did was I actually went over to London for a week before we made our decision, so I can at least get a sense of both the company there as well as the city and the area. So that's before we made the decision. And Faye and I, like I mentioned, we talked a lot about this because it does require. It's not just it is a significant change in her career to pause her current role and then move over without a sure opportunity available for her. So the other thing that we did is after we moved here, I moved first, and I stayed in a short-term temporary housing, so I could look for a permanent place, explore the neighborhood. So I think I was here for 2 months before they moved, and so that's another thing that helped, which is just to be there for a longer period of time to explore and find a long-term place that we actually want to live. And then the last thing I think is when Faye and my son Lucas came over to the UK, we also had my mother come and help. We were lucky to have family to be able to help a little bit in the transition, and that helped a little bit as well.
Really helpful. And just a quick reminder for our audience, we have 1 hour today, and you can probably see in the invite, we have a whole list of questions. There were 7 or 8 questions that we prepare. So we're gonna go over those questions one by one, not necessarily all in the same, length of time, but we're going to try our best to go through all the questions. If you do have specific questions that you feel are not on the list, please do type in so that we're going to prepare. We can see it, and we'll try our best to answer your questions. So let's go back to what we're talking about. I think you both of you have already mentioned a little of the preparation work you have done before really making and moving overseas. And you talk about 10 years ago, I think the LinkedIn, reaching out to the recruiter. 10 years ago, 2014, I think the job market, I honestly don't remember what it was like back then. I have to be honest with you. As a mom, my memory is like a fish, really short nowadays. I don't even remember what it was like 10 days ago, let alone 10 years ago. But I would venture out to say the job market was probably not as challenging as it is today. From that perspective, other than LinkedIn, reaching out to recruiter, as you said, Faye, did you find any other resources that are really helpful that you would maybe even recommend to the younger generation and our audience today? Let's say either a local network from your industry, financial industry perspective, or not your industry, the gaming and tech perspective, or maybe Yale alumni resource, since we're all Yaleys today. Anything that jump out of your mind you want to share with us?
I think I don't have a specific thing, but I would say using your network, whether it's the Yale network or your family network or your own personal network, depending on where you are in your stage of career, is really helpful. So just as an example, even though we went to London because of a work opportunity. The reason we came to Berlin was because of a personal connection or a professional connection I had from a prior experience, who knew I was in Europe working for the other company, and then reached out about a different opportunity in a different part of Europe, so in Germany this time. So I think the personal network part, especially as you progress later on in your career, is very, very helpful, very important for finding other opportunities in other areas.
100%. Anything you want to add, Faye? If not, I saw a couple challenging questions here, actually, so you guys better be prepared. Okay. All right. So, in fact, this is perfect timing because I was preparing to ask about the pros and cons of working in different countries. In your case, different countries, but there are some, I would say, concrete challenges when it comes to work in Europe. Realistically speaking, and you guys are the expert, we all know that in the US, in general, I'm not talking about specific industry, but in general, the salaries are higher compared to most other markets, compared to Germany, compared to many countries in East Asia, so on and so forth. So one of the questions that came from our audience is that your experience in Germany or Europe in general, that the salary is generally less and the taxes are higher? And if so, what are some concrete and realistic benefits for you as working parents that makes your experience positive living there? So that's the first part of the question. I'll finish the second part first, and one person can answer while the other person think. The second one is, there are, of course, talking about now versus 10 years ago, the world is going through a lot of changes. 10 years ago, there were no COVID. 10 years ago, the economy was quite different than what we're experiencing today from a world market perspective. As East Asians, for both of you, do you feel maybe from a culture perspective, it's different living and working in other countries compared to your home countries? When I say home countries, I mean both Asia, where you are from, born and raised originally, as well as America. Good questions, though, I have to say. Not easy to answer.
Jay, do you want to take?
Yeah, I can take the first one and you can add on. Yeah, so the jobs in Europe, including UK, did pay way less in the US. Unless you're doing an internal transfer where your global company are willing to keep your pay. I remember I mentioned when we were in the 2-3 weeks decision period, I was reaching out to some recruiter just to get a sense of the market, including the pay level. And I still remember one of the recruiters over the phone was asking about my current salary level back then. And then when she heard it, she said, "Oh dear, you're never gonna get paid as much as possible in London, not even close." And then so that is a fact. Yeah, so if you're looking at the gross pay level, it's not comparable, even for some of the professional services industry. But I guess you just have to take into account and many other things, and then think about what's your goal and what you want. If you yeah, so and the overall in the UK and in Europe, the stereotype is true. The work-life balance it's much better. They respond the work-life boundaries quite strictly. Weekends, yeah, you very, very rarely will get any email after Friday evening. And then so people do respect the holidays. And over summer, people do tend to take longer holidays, like 3 weeks is, I've never taken 3 weeks holiday before, but I think in London and Germany, especially in summer or Christmas season, it's quite common for people to be gone for 3 weeks or even 4. So that's something. And then especially in Germany, so I feel like in Germany, especially when we're living in Berlin, there's a bit of the socialism feel there, where you have very good social welfare, and I think UK is kind of in the middle. So in Germany, especially raising a kid, I feel they did something right. So you have the child care benefit. No matter what your income level is, you get 200 euros per kid. And then the nurseries are all free based on your working condition. If 2 parents are both working full-time, the government actually give you a voucher, so you send your kids to nursery for free, which is a great benefit. And then yeah, and also you got to experience the different types of cultures and the ease of travel, those type of things. So overall, I think it's a quite nice family experience and life experience living there. We do get paid less in terms of net pay, but but as you grow more, advance your career more, the different roles they also pay differently. So it does not necessarily mean you are always suffering from a pay cut. It could even out in some other areas, and also as your own career grow. And in terms of the racism, I have to admit, so London is very, very international, and then Germany less so, depending on the area. So we are kind of living a little expat bubble in central Berlin. So I think more or less we feel less of that because of our children goes to a bilingual school where half of the children are from everywhere, like they're not local German families. And also, like, as a result, our neighbors, our network from the parenting group, it's all quite international. So we didn't feel as much, but maybe when we live in some more outskirts area, things will be quite different. Maybe I can elaborate on that.
So I mean, I mentioned this in the beginning. So I grew up in Middle America. So specifically, I grew up in Oklahoma from the age of 7. And so those of you who are familiar with the Bible Belt and areas around that, it's not that people are super nice, but people just tend to have less exposure to different cultures and different perspectives. And so, especially for kids, then there's a lot of racism that happens, even if it's just part of how they were sort of brought up in the culture, right? It's not intentionally mean per se. So I definitely experienced that growing up in the U.S. And I experienced that much less on the coast, whether it's in New York City or when we worked and lived there, or in California, where there are just so many more East Asians. And so I think when we went to London, for me, it definitely did not feel like there was more racism, even though I'm talking about our only experiences are within sort of very central parts of London because that's where we lived and worked, where it's very international, people from sort of all different countries back then before Brexit, and so that was very nice. I will say that I think one time when we traveled to, I forget if it was in Oxford or if it was in Cambridge, I did experience some racism, but not in central London, although I'm sure it happens. We were just lucky that we didn't experience it there. And then in Berlin, like Faye said, we are kind of in a bubble of a lot of multicultural people here from Eastern Europe, from Asia, from the US. And so I mean, the most common language that people speak in this part of Berlin is actually English because some of even the workers, let's say at the restaurant, might not speak German fluently. And so there is less race-based discrimination, at least not less so that I can feel compared to some other experiences I've had in the past. But I do know that in other parts of Germany, from talking with other colleagues and friends who have been there, that there's definitely different experiences across Germany.
That is indeed a very candid view, I have to say. And I really resonate with what you said, Nai, that I think in the US, living on the two coasts is quite different. And similar to you, I have in the past 12 years, really, I've lived in Southern California. And it's very much global. And I think it's the same for New York, for the large cities, and so on and so forth. So maybe one of the things I think it just if I know the very last question is what are some advice you would offer to people who are interested in pursuing a global career, it's just maybe start from somewhere that are really easier for you to navigate. The two codes of the US, if US is a foreign country to you, or maybe the large cities such as London or central Berlin and so on and so forth, and might be an easier start from a culture perspective. So that said, let's moving on. I know we're halfway through, and this question is a new question specifically for Nai. And you mentioned early on that your first job, I believe that was the first job, was actually in education. So we have some audience today that are undergraduate pursuing more of a social science degree in global affairs and interest in education reform work. So he's interested in how did you get into education reform in Taiwan, and maybe some thoughts and suggestions, just some simple words and suggestions, because we have a lot of other questions coming up as well.
Yeah, I think for me it was very personal. My mother, when we were in Taiwan, she actually helped co-found this education reform nonprofit. And so when I first graduated, I thought, hey, I've been also exposed to this organization throughout my life. So it was just one of those things where I wanted to go help, right? And so that's why I did that. So it was a personal connection, and education has always been important to me. So so it's more a personal answer there.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. Well, if this audience have more specific questions, we'll be sure to share nice email, and so maybe you guys can follow up. I think it's a really excellent question. So I'll ask the next two questions together, and I think in some way you guys already answered that. It's what are some of the biggest challenges you have had? You talk about, moving there as parent, you talk about the salary, you're talking about the racism to some extent. What are some of other challenges you feel maybe we haven't touched upon? And what are some lessons learned from those challenges? I'll ask those two together.
Yeah, I can start a point and then hand over to Nai. So one of the professional challenge that I have is it depends on what stage in your career and then what kind of roles, the nature of the job. But I mean, once you moved in one places, you establish some professional network as well. But then when you move across to different location, you largely lose your network. I mean, you can still try to keep in contact, but it's different because you're working a completely different market. So that is a challenge for me. When I was moving across, I was like in the mid-career. When I was in the Bay Area, so I do have like industry conferences, and then also in the Silicon Valley, like the tech companies, capital markets professionals, sometimes they hang out, they know each other from previous coworkers, friends. So where I had that network to bounce ideas, to talk about what's going on, and to learn lessons from each other, just chit-chatting, and also for future career opportunities within that network, people can refer you. And then when I was in London, I also slightly switched my career track from traditional capital markets to a fintech scale up. So yeah, so losing that is it feels a little bit lonely in the beginning, and also feels like less support. Sometimes I wonder, oh, what do other people do in their company in similar roles? Like I don't have a sounding board like what I used to have. So that's one challenge that I face professionally. However, you could still start to build. It takes time, but it's not entirely impossible. So now I think I had a network in the fintech industry in London, which I use from time to time as a sounding board, as like exploring career opportunities and this and that. So that's one aspect, and I'll let Nai add more.
I think professionally, definitely the network is one thing. You have to rebuild it. Also, I would say when I went to London, one of the things I did was talk to some of my other colleagues who had actually spent considerable amount of time in London in their careers. And one of the advice that I got was to really understand the difference in the culture. And so one specific example was they asked me or they told me that I should always go to the pub because first of all, in London or in the UK, it's very common to go to a pub, and it's always that one pub for the whole company that you always go to. And the reason for that I needed to go is because if I'm in a leadership role, the only way or one of the ways I can easily get a sense of what's happening, what people are really thinking, is to go to the pub and where people actually talk more candidly about what they're thinking, feeling, or what is happening. And so I took that to heart, which was a little bit difficult because again, when we first moved to the UK, my son was, I think at the time then 8 or 10 months. And I had to try to go to the pub every Friday and sometimes Thursdays for professional reasons. So that was one of the again, also, I would say professional challenges is to get to know the cultural differences, and so you can know how you sort of behave differently or act differently to fit into that culture. And then the personal side, I think, is also a challenge, right? The same thing on the professional side when we talk about the network. You also lose potentially your friend circle or your family. It's just not as easy or not as close when you're across an entire ocean, and especially from, for example, California to London is still a 10-hour plus flight. So it's not so easy then to see family, to keep in touch. It's much easier nowadays than it was decades ago, but it's still not easy. So I think that's a major challenge.
I would also add that we have something similar in the US. If you really wanting to know how people are thinking, you go to the bar. We don't say pub. I would say that's probably the same. Couldn't agree with you more. We have a couple other questions, which I think it's very relevant from a international student's perspective, especially as a student, if you were born outside the US, came to the US for school, and then wanted to establish your career here, because we have all been through this OPT, CPT, or H1 process, and we know it's not easy. So there's one specific question which I really like. I think that's quite relevant. It's as an international student, is it much more difficult to regain access back to the US once you choose to work in Europe? So maybe another word to ask the question is, I heard someone in my company mention to me the other day that as American, or as whomever, international students, we could say international students, well, going out from the US to another country, there are 4 swimming lanes. Whereas coming back from to US, there's only 1. Do you agree with that? Do you find it's much easier to go to another country from the US for work versus vice versa?
So I can share my perspective and also personal experience. So I think my personal experience doesn't necessarily reflect that. With that said, my perspective in talking with other people who have similar types of experiences working in Europe and then going back to the States is similar to that, which is it's much easier to go from the US to different parts of Europe and opportunities, and then coming back it is a little bit more difficult. So I have not personally experienced this, but this is also what I hear from other people in my network who have gone abroad or who are working or starting off their careers in Europe and then going to the US. But again, it's very dependent on the sector that you're in, the companies, and how international they are. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, and I summarized it pretty well, because it's also not specific relevant to my situation. I do echo that it depends a lot on the industry and the profession you are in. I mean, certain professions, if you need a professional qualification, then that's a big hurdle. And then, but in certain other areas, I know specifically on the human rights nonprofit, I have to say I am not very knowledgeable in that sector, but it doesn't sound like an area that is very locally focused. Certain industry have a more global breadth, where the skill set, the knowledge is more transferable than others. So it just really depends on the area that you are in. I think for both Nai and I, the specific industry that we're in, I'm not feeling that difficult because I still, from time to time, have recruiter based in the US reach out to me for opportunities. So maybe that's an indicator. Yeah.
So what are the next steps for you? Coming back to the US, or are you thinking about staying in Europe in general for a little bit longer?
We better have the same
I was
answer for this
gonna
one.
save. Oh, sorry. I was gonna save the question to the very end, but since you were talking about that, Faye, and I thought, really, what's the next for you? You've been in Europe for a while, right?
Yeah, so long term, I think we will move back to the States because more family ties in the States. Nice direct families are not in the are all in the States, and I have a bunch of cousins and uncles. Both of us have more ties to the States. So yeah, but we are also conscious that our children are growing up. So our older son just turned 8. So we don't definitely try to avoid moving again in his teenage years. So that doesn't leave us a lot of time. So we don't have a set timeline yet, but broadly we want to find some opportunity to move back in the coming few years, and then probably settle in a place for a while, primarily due to the children. So that's and then industry-wise, I want to more or less stay in the fintech industry because I quite enjoy it, and I feel there's a lot of connected ideas that is has synergies to be gained from the global knowledge that I had here. Yeah.
I will say that we consider very strongly whether to stay in the UK or in Germany long term, as in for years, while our kids grow up and then maybe beyond, because really the social system here is so strong and good, that it is a nice place to be if you want to be here long term. At the end of the day, the main thing that I think sways us, again, we're not 100% sure yet, but sways us more towards going back to the States is because of family.
Biggest surprise for you in having an international career so far? I like this question a lot. Surprise for you.
I can start. I think, honestly, especially my current role. So currently, I'm the managing director of a company called Wuga, and we are something like 350 employees from 54 different countries. And I think the cultural differences, I feel so much stronger in this role than in any other role in the past. And it's very I can maybe also during this time period, a lot of things have happened that sort of highlights the different cultural perspectives or different countries' perspectives. But I can see that our employees from the U.S. reacting to, for example, when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, in a different way than the colleagues from Eastern Europe, than the colleagues from Asia, and so it was really interesting to, I think, to really sort of see the lens of how different cultures view all of these different events and challenges, and how, for me, one of the interesting things is how to create the right company culture that can actually be diverse and inclusive for all of these different backgrounds of people. So that was somewhat of a surprise, because coming from America, you think, hey, America is supposed to be the melting pot of the world. It's supposed to be where all different cultures are, and that it's sort of a norm. But I think much of that I didn't so much experience in the States, but I experienced much more in like a very international company in Europe. Yeah.
So yeah, this is a really good question. One of the big surprise, it's a positive surprise, is initially I thought things work differently in different places. And I was a bit intimidated in the beginning. I was like, oh, I don't know how, because I work in the fintech industry. My company is a challenger bank who's trying to gain a banking license, and using technology to provide better services. So we have to deal with the UK regulators quite a lot, and then try to navigate the banking landscape. So in the beginning, I was like, oh, I know nothing about the banking regulation in the UK. But then the more that I dig into it, I try to learn it. You can feel that globally, a lot of the things are quite connected. True, the implementation details are written differently and done differently. But then the philosophy of a lot of things are quite well connected. You look at the regulator in the UK, in Germany, even in Asia, and in the US, they're trying to do similar things. How to force the bank to have disciplines to take risk, how to do certain consumer protection. For example, your deposit is always protected to a certain amount. I think in the US it's 250K, and then different countries have a different amount. It was done by different organizations, some were private, some were semi-government. But I was actually surprised that how similar that the mechanism are across the globe. So that is truly a positive surprise. I mean, I'm talking specifically in the fintech industry, but I'm sure certain things happen in other industry as well, because we live in the human world, and then regulators, the government are trying to do the right thing to protect the people, and then the companies, as long as you are a sound-minded company are trying to optimize certain things for the shareholder values, or in a nonprofit for certain principle that you are going for, are quite universal. So that's actually one of the interesting surprise that I gained throughout the years by working internationally.
I have another one. So I think this is important. So I think Faye touched on this before, which is around this perception that, hey, Europe has better work-life balance than the US. And one of my surprises, I knew this coming in, that Europe has supposedly better work-life balance. And I just thought of, hey, for the weekend, you probably don't actually get people emailing you, messaging, or when you're on vacation, you actually can sort of turn off the work. So I kind of knew that, but the surprise was I didn't realize how much it would impact me as a person, right? The how much I would enjoy that, how important that actually is to be able to have that. So I think that was one of the good surprises that I didn't expect. Coming from, you have before this, right? I'm so career driven, very much work driven. Faye and I both, she from an investment banking background, me from a consulting background at the time, going into for sort of more hardcore gaming type of environments in San Francisco and New York. It's just such a big change, and in terms of mindset, and a very good surprise.
Really good advice. I'm gonna learn that and started to really give a pause on my mind during the weekend and on vacation. I think that's important to remember for all of us, actually. In the last 9 minutes, maybe one final question on the list. And of course, for the audience, if you have other lingering questions, we may have time for one or two more. Feel free to type in the Q&A. But in general, what are some advice you would give for audience that are thinking about pursuing a global career? Anything that you feel we haven't touched upon just yet?
I would say my first question would be, or first thought would be, why do you want to go abroad, or why do you want to have a global career? And I think the answer to that helps, or if you don't have a really good answer for that, the self-introspection helps a lot with figuring out what do you really want. And that would be my advice. Yeah. Be sure that you want to go to a different country, have a global career before you do it. Yeah.
So start with why, like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a lot of the concepts depends, because different people have different situation. But understanding your starting point of your end goal is quite important, because there are compromises and there are pros and cons. Knowing what is more important to you personally will help you navigate those pros and cons better, to come to a more informed decision. And then that will also make you more, how do I say, relieved and make peace with certain disadvantages that you have to accept, because I'm going for other things, and these are the things that I should be able to bear it. Yeah, it's quite abstract, but that's why I said it's quite situational and personal. But yeah, understand why and understand your own end goal is quite important in the whole decision-making process.
Appreciate that. I think that's really well said. It is a mindset that starting with a why you wanted to do a global career. Is that from a career perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a family perspective? Have a clear answer of the why before you started to do the what and decide on the how. Because I think once you have a clear understanding of the why and rationale, when you have obstacles along the way, it's a little bit easier for you to overcome them. They're always going to be there, but hey, this is the reason why I wanted to do that. Keep things in mind and keep that in perspective. It will really help you to navigate your career from a global perspective. So you hindsight, once you are, over the hump, it's all worthwhile. Okay, wonderful. Let me see. I think we have one final questions. Do you know anyone who tried a similar path and ended up in worse situations in their career and lifestyle? What do you think they did differently, and how do your choices differ? Ooh, challenging questions. Challenging and candid questions. I don't know if you would see that, because if they end up in a worse situation, how would they, unless you know that person really well, they would share that candidly with you. Otherwise, how would you? I mean, I don't know. Curious to hear your perspectives.
So I know some people, I'm not particularly close, but as I mentioned before, so we live in this central Berlin, and we have exposure to a lot of expat families, partially because my children's school network, and partially because of the neighborhood, the location that we're living in. So in Berlin, I did run into one or two person who really couldn't get used to the life, the weather, and everything in Berlin. They were also international, moved across before, and then prior to this, they lived in Dubai. Nice weather, sunny all year round, low tax, quite international, so this and that. And then if you were trying to do a direct comparison, it's not comparable, but Berlin has long, cold, miserable winter. So that is quite important for some people, and also the high tax, and then the language, all the things. So I guess it's also a mindset, like do your research, know what you are step into. As I said, I'm not particularly close with the two people that I met, but they all was in a pretty low mood. They both moved for their family. They also have their own career. They managed to find new careers in Berlin, and it actually sounds pretty okay. One has an internal relocation, the other one managed to join a quite a promising startup. However, I think just the overall lifestyle doesn't fit them. And I think Nai previously mentioned like go visit, trying to stay there and then talk to people and also know what's important to you and what's less important to you. For us, weather is less of an issue because the London winter is not so much better. And in the East Coast, we've been through the cold. So just know your tolerance level and know what you're going for, I guess. Yeah. And don't do direct comparison because that is quite meaningless. If you're always dwelling on the past to see how wonderful this and that is and compare it with the negativity in front of you, then it's not going to do you any good, I guess.
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree. All the cases that I know of people who moved somewhere and then decided it wasn't a good idea or regretted it or moved back, whatever. Usually the difference is resolved if first they're clear on the why and the trade-offs they have to make, and the second they've done the research to really understand the trade-offs. So I think those two things address most of the would have helped. They might have solved it because sometimes you really just don't know until you're there. But it would have probably helped a number of them.
Well, that's perfect. I think we're perfect on timing. Really appreciate Faye and Nai for your time. I know it's quite late in Berlin for you. And I learned a lot, honestly, even though we've known each other for more than 10 years. But honestly, sitting here and listening to your answers and going through the journey, I learned a lot and have a lot to think about, really. And I hope it's the same for those of you who chose to spend your 1 hour in the mid-afternoon or wherever you are with us. We will be sure to share the recording as soon as we can. And hopefully we can see you in the next Fire Chat or Yale Career Panel. Thank you.
Much. It's a great honor, and thank you so much for all the thought-provoking questions from the audience. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.